Okay. Proposition 20 increases jail time for two-time shoplifters and tracks their DNA. Okay, Prop 20 does a lot more than that. This is a one that is really about criminal justice. It limits parole to only nonviolent offenders. It authorizes felony charges for theft crimes. DNA would be collected on all perpetrators, including for misdemeanors. And new categorizations of theft are created for serial theft and organized retail theft. Why? Well, since we've had prison reform with Props 47 and 57, I'll get there in just a second, we've had some criminal justice reforms pretty recently in an attempt to do two things. One, reduce jail and prison overcrowding, because we have been bursting at the seams. And the federal government has come in, and we're in a federal receivership, and basically they've said, look, you need to reduce your prison population. If you don't, we're going to make you release people, period. Like they just go out on the street because we're tired of, you need to reduce your prison population, and you're clearly not building more prisons and fixing the jails that you have to the tune of, what you need to do. So you have some choices. So one of the ways that Jerry Brown helped try to fix this problem was through reclassifying certain kinds of crimes. Now, if you're watching TV, and I have not been, so I have not been privy to all these wonderful ads that are telling you that rapists and criminals and sex offenders are out to get you because they're all roaming the streets right now. But I know that's what they're saying. Okay. The point is not that, in fact, we're going to reclassify all these crimes and we're all going to be safer. The point is that some of those, these 22 types of crimes were recategorized, I believe, as wobblers, where a judge can come in and say, no, we need to treat these as either felonies or misdemeanors. Now, I hope I'm getting that right, because it's my understanding, in the way that I read it, that they are wobblers, and this would actually make them now not allow them to be considered misdemeanors under any case, and would always be a felony. Okay. So it actually is recategorizing crimes that through criminal justice reform, California voters have reclassified. Like marijuana possession, I don't believe is one of them, but like a lot of people are in jail for drug crimes. And that's, thanks to Props 47 and 57, we've said you can only be in jail for certain and kept in prison for a long time based on these kinds of things. All right, so if you're for Prop 20, you're going to reclassify about 22 crimes as felonies, and you're considering them violent again, and violent under law. Now, they may be violent, but judges have always had the discretion to say what is a violent crime in, especially under wobblers, if it's a felony or not, and they consider all the facts of that case. So under wobblers, the judge would decide to punish as a felony or misdemeanor. This one would say, no, it's absolutely a felony, okay? You would punish those who recommit crimes by charging them with more serious crimes. So for serial theft and organized theft, which has gone up under recent laws, that's pretty much the only category of crimes that has been increasing. It would create felonies. So if you're a thief, you would actually now be a felon. Now, the problem with this is, at least in recategorizing like a $250 theft as a crime, if you have mental illness, then that should be treated as mental illness, right? But sometimes those types of people who do, have, let's say, schizophrenia, I'm just picking one out of the air, and they're committing crimes, well, it's going to be a lot harder to work with them and to get those kinds of, if once you address the mental health problems, that is also it's going to be a lot harder to deal with their felony convictions. So if you're against it, you're thinking about that kind of effect for sort of the most dispossessed and the least, for those who are sort of least able to deal with these problems. Now, of course, if you're a victim of a crime, you're like, wait a minute, why should anybody who commits a sex crime be charged with a misdemeanor? Well, I don't have any good argument for that, except maybe the facts of the case were such that a judge decided that Well, it really was a misdemeanor and not a felony. But it does, I mean, this is the one part to be perfectly honest, I haven't been able to really sort through like what actual felonies that were considered felonies are now considered misdemeanors have actually led to much worse crime, or rapists wandering the streets. I don't have the answer for you for that, but that is an empirical question. I just didn't have time to find the answer. But we do know that charging people with lower level crimes like serial and organized theft, if you do that, it will result in higher jail populations and higher prison populations. And for all the other people who are now like recategorizing those 22, now you're a felon, it's going to drive our prison populations up yet more. And so that, and this does fly in the face of research. And I do mention one here, the National Academy of Sciences does have studies out, and it's not just the only one, that longer sentences actually tend to result in higher recidivism. So like the longer you're in jail, the worse it is. Like it's not teaching you to be a better person. So is prison the right answer? Or should we be pouring more money, like leave them as misdemeanors and then pour more money into rehabilitation or dealing with mental health? So this is the question that I have, right? But it does also would signal to the legislature that no, we don't want criminal justice reform. We're fine with treating people as criminals, and we do know that then that does tend to have a disproportionate impact on people of color. So those are some of the pros and the cons to Prop 20. Prop 20 is endorsed by law enforcement, generally speaking. A lot of DAs, police unions are behind it. Crime victims like Crime Victims United and Survivors, Police Chiefs Association, and the California Retailers Association, no surprise there because there's been increases in theft. All right, against it, the LA Times, other kinds of newspapers are against it. The Democratic Party of California, former California Governor Jerry Brown, ACLU of California, that is the American Civil Liberties Union, California Teachers Association, probation, and the chief probation officers of America are also against it. So, which is kind of interesting. All right, so lots of, there's lots to go on. Does anybody have any questions about this one? I mean, this is a pretty big one, and in some of your classes, you may have talked about it, depending on whether or not you, I don't know, what it may have come up in your classes or not. So I'd be interested to hear other kinds of things that have been generated around that. Okay. All right, so Prop 21 allows rent control for 15-year-old buildings if cities approve. Okay, this is like Prop 10 that failed, but different. So how is it different? All right, let's go back to, okay, this is Prop 21. Let's go back to the basics here. The state did impose, so after Prop 10 failed, the state did impose 5% rent controls by law after Prop 10 failed. Okay. I'm repeating myself, sorry. It did, so in other words, within a given year, I don't believe you can raise the rent more than 5%, but it only applies to certain kinds of properties. This would allow cities to determine which properties are covered, like how old. So this would allow, if you want to say like, yeah, the buildings that are over 20 years old or over 30 years old or over 15 years old, right? They have to be over 15 years old. But it would allow cities to come in and say, yeah, for any building that is over this age, we're going to institute rent control of 5%, 10%, 18%, who knows, right? So it gives cities the ability. I guess it couldn't be over 5 because that's state law now. It does exclude mom and pop operations with 2 properties. So like if you have your own property and then you own 2 houses. So let's say you did inherit that house when your parents passed away and you want to rent it out. And now that's rental income for you. You can hold on to that and you're not covered by this law. And you can hold on to 2 more. You can hold on to 2 and they're not covered by this law. Or if you have a property, let's say you have a little mini house on your property or a room in your house. It's supposedly, as far as I've heard, that would in fact be excluded from this law because you're considered mom and pop. Cities could enable rent controls on vacant apartments. That's usually when rent resets, but not more than 15% over 3 years. that is how I read it. I hope that's right. The idea here is the only time a landlord can raise the rent astronomically in the past was that when the apartment was vacated. So now it's empty. It doesn't matter if it's empty for 5 seconds or a day or a year. But once the property was vacated, there was a turnover. The landlord could jack up the rent basically to anything they wanted, right? They could jack it up 30%. They could jack it up 15%. They could jack it up 100%. Didn't matter, right? Just based on the fact that it was then vacant. That was the only time they could do it. So this would kind of close a little loophole in a sense, because it would say, okay, cities that want to have that, if that vacancy occurs, they don't want to give landlords an incentive to just kick people out so it's vacant and then jack up the rent. So this would say you can't do it at more than 15% over 3 years. So yeah, you can increase the rent. You could do it 15% right away, but that would be the only 15% rent increase you could have in 3 years, like, I suppose. And I'm not sure how it figures into the 5% cap with the state, because I haven't done that much and I'm not an expert on rents. So, okay. On the pro side, you would vote for this if you believe that it would help stabilize neighborhoods because it would lead to lower turnover. And that means that, it's great to have rent stabilization because fewer people will move out, right? And that's good for a neighborhood. People know each other. People actually have neighborhood communities, right? And it benefits low-income renters especially. So, especially, before we even had the rent controls from the state, it was, it could go up astronomically. It wasn't happening everywhere. It was happening principally in places like San Francisco and the Bay Area, and also in LA. But this is, of course, now blanketing the state. By the way, there was something else I added to my slide, and I don't know what happened to it. It must not have saved. This also, because I didn't read it. Sorry, I skipped over this line. It allows single family homes to be rent controlled. Okay, that's important because right now, single family homes, like if your family is renting a house, there are no rent controls on that. It can go up at any point. It can go up, 20, 30%, whatever, at any time, as long as there's like a 30-day notice. They're just not covered. This would cover single family homes. All right. Okay, so the prohibition on controls for 15-year-old units. So in other words, it has to be 15 years old or more. It helps protect new builds. In other words, you don't want to incentivize developers or disincentivize building, because like if you're a developer and you build a grand new apartment building, and now the state comes in and says, oh, we're going to make you have rent control. Well, your whole business model is going to fall apart because you have costs that you have to pay off. It was an expensive new build, and it's going to take you at least 15 years probably to recoup the amount of money that you spent to build the thing. So, or rebuilds or reconstruction. So at least for 15 years, for all buildings and for all construction that's 15 years or newer, this is not going to apply to those, okay? And it shouldn't disincentivize people from making or building new things or new apartment buildings and multi-family and multi-unit homes. If you're for this, you know that you want to prevent homelessness, and helping cities enact rent controls means that it would help prevent homelessness, which taxpayers already support, right? It's like $35,000 to $40,000 a year per person when a person becomes homeless, if we're helping them. And so, this is like a way of preventing us from spending other kinds of money in other places because people are kicked out of their homes because they can't afford it. The corporations that own apartment buildings would be most affected, but let's not kid ourselves. A lot of people have a couple of units or maybe 3 units, and it's going to affect you if you have 3 units. It's going to affect you if you have more than that. So in other words, it's not just corporations who are affected, they're just most affected. If you are against this, it means that you're going to have less tax revenues for local government because you're collecting less, right? You're just collecting less. So local government could take a hit, millions of dollars. It disadvantages landlords in a whole lot of ways. It makes life a lot worse for them. And I could ask, or no, I could add, sorry, I could add one thing. I'm going to add it to this. It is about freedom, right? It is about capitalism and freedom. In other words, I know a lot of landlords who've said, I shouldn't say a lot, I know a few landlords who have said, two, who have both said, look, this is capitalist America. Why? I have made a business decision. Why are you telling me how much I can charge? If the market says this, then the market says this, and I should be able to charge it. That's my choice. That we live in a capitalist society. That is the way that, I should be enabled as a business owner to do my business. Okay. Some economists do oppose rent controls because it does tend to put a drag on new housing production and new construction. Why? Because you may not recoup your build costs over 15 years. It could also reduce the housing supply if landlords convert units that are now rent controlled to condominiums. So if you're like if you're in an apartment building, right now, what your landlord could do is kick everybody out essentially and say, I'm going to now not have this on the market as an apartment. I'm converting them all to condos and I'm selling them off. That has happened. There's some proof or some evidence that that's happened. There was a big San Francisco study that showed that to be the case. It was just one study. I don't know if that's, like the end all be all, but there is some evidence that that is the case. And the vacancy rule might make it hard to realize investments. In other words, because you're saying, okay, only 15% over 3 years. Well, again, if you've made improvements to your property, it might be hard. Again, the state rule is that it's like 5% plus inflation or plus the cost of living. And there are some exceptions for making improvements to properties, how you recoup that, but it could also disincentivize people. Like if you have a really crappy apartment, what incentive does your landlord have to fix anything or, put in a new stove or do whatever? Okay. And also if you're against it, you'd say, well, look, the state law just went into effect. It hasn't even been in effect for a whole year yet. Let's just see if it works. Okay. Uncertainty disrupts the markets. Why are we trying to do this? Let's just see if the law works. The state legislature has already tried to fix it. Okay. So there we have the two pro and the con. Okay. We're moving along. We're getting there. Okay. We have some big ones here at the end. Prop 12. We've already had a few big ones. Proposition 22 makes Uber drivers independent contractors, not full employees. Okay, here is the background. AB 5, Assembly Bill 5 is a law the state legislature passed just recently, and it was in an attempt to target exactly Uber and Lyft drivers, or Uber and Lyft companies, not the drivers themselves. But it is because we have an economy that is built on a model in which employers provide benefits rather than the state. What do I mean by benefits? Look 2 lines down. Health benefits, retirement benefits, unemployment benefits, sick leave, any kind of overtime, all those kinds of benefits. We layer those on employers. We have an economy in the United States that is built on employers basically providing benefits for their employees if they're over a certain size. If you can't get those through your employers, where are you going to get them? The state, right? It's the state that's going to help you with, now we do pay to Social Security. It ain't much, but we would, if you don't have health insurance benefits, you're going to try to get them through the state, right? If you're not employed, well, you're not going to be able to get unemployment benefits through the state, but maybe there's other ways that you can get some social benefits. But we are slowly, well, actually, I shouldn't even say slowly. We're quickly moving to a different kind of economy. The disruptors have entered the picture. Uber and Lyft and Airbnb and all of those kinds of gig economy type of companies are bringing us into a new world of gig economies where you are in charge of your own fate. Yay! I can control when I work and when I don't work. Oh, but I don't have any of the benefits. I have no retirement. I have no health insurance. God forbid I get sick. Where am I going to get, where am I going to get these employment benefits? What if I'm not employed? What if I get hurt and I can't get employed, right? So in other words, we're relying on workers to assume responsibilities that mostly employers have been in charge of. And we're doing it in a way that just leads to bazillions of profits for these big giant companies. So what happens? The state does pay in the end, because if you don't get those benefits from your employers, who's going to end up paying? Well, you and I do, through the state of California. So what are we going to do about that? So Lorena Gonzalez sponsored this bill. She was the author. It was signed on by a lot of Democrats in the legislature, which of course we have a very Democratic legislature. It is a supermajority of the Democratic legislature. They said, yes, we need this bill. We're going to target them, and we're going to target those companies. And we're going to say that they're not independent contractors anymore. They're employees. So Prop 22 is an attempt to come back. Now, it's sponsored by Uber and Lyft, and it's an attempt to address AB 5, but it says that they're not employees, they're contractors. They're still contractors. So it's a response to AB 5 that classified those contractors as employees if they provided essential services to the business. So what AB 5 does, it says, if you provide an essential business or essential service to a company, then you're really an employee of that company. A company can't just be a company that says, I want you to do this, and I want you to do that, and I want you to do that, and that's my company. It's that, like, if Uber and Lyft, well, actually, that's not a good way to put it, because you could be a wedding planner, and you could hire, right? You could hire musicians, and you could hire cake company, and you could hire, but this it actually has created some uncertainty about, well, are those independent contractors really employees of the wedding service? Because the wedding service planner couldn't actually have a business without that. So there's been a lot of clarification of the law over the last couple of years, but clearly companies like Uber and Lyft could not exist without drivers, right? So what AB 5 did was to reclassify drivers for app-based businesses as independent contractors, not employees. And what Prop 22 would do is say, so Prop 22 would do this. Prop 22 would say, no, they're not employees. They really are independent contractors. And Prop 22 would give drivers some compensation, like minimum earnings and healthcare subsidies. That is like, okay, if you work a certain number of hours, we're going to give you X number of dollars, or we'll allow you to join a pool, for healthcare. It's not like we're giving you full healthcare like you would get for if you worked for a big company. And car insurance, like we'll give you access to that, but not benefits like minimum wage, overtime, unemployment insurance, workers' comp, retirement, health insurance. Okay. It exempts companies from regulations affecting employees like overtime, sick time, time off, benefits, scheduling. So in other words, they still do have the gig economy structure. Uber and Lyft have threatened that they will suspend operations in California. But I will say other companies are ready to fill the void, and they're ready to say, look, if this doesn't pass, then we're going to take over for Uber and Lyft, and we'll do it according to the law. So it's not like we're, oh my gosh, we're going to lose Uber and Lyft and everybody's going to lose everything. Other companies will fill the void. Okay, so the basics here. If you're for it, you're going to say, you know what? Most workers, 80% of them, and there have been quite a few studies about this, about 80% of Uber and Lyft drivers are putting in full-time hours without benefits. Okay, now those studies could be wrong. I have not reviewed those studies. I'll be upfront, but a couple of them looked, at least on first glance, to be legit studies. Like one of them was out of UC Santa Cruz. Okay, another one was out of Los Angeles, and they're saying half of drivers work more than 40 hours a week. 30% work more than 60 hours a week. So it was either 50 or 60. So people are really putting that. So added together, that's 80% of drivers are actually working more than full-time hours, and they're getting no benefits. Now, on the other side, workers are just going to lose the freedom to make their own hours and they don't want to be employees. Does this mean Uber and Lyft would say, okay, now employee, you have to work 6 hours within this shift and we're going to schedule you? Well, that completely defeats the purpose of having Uber and Lyft drivers, at least for themselves, being able to do what they want. That now you're back to taxi service. And this, of course, really disrupted the taxi service. Taxis are still around, but they've got to play by some really stringent rules. So this is really a question, if you want to answer, that you need to answer. Do we put Prop 22 into place? Because, okay, well, they're sort of feeding some scraps to the Uber and Lyft drivers, and it only applies to Uber and Lyft drivers. It still leaves the AB5 in place for everybody else. Or do you say, well, no to this, look, Uber and Lyft, suck it up, treat people like employees, because that's really what you are. You're a big business and you're just making profits off the backs of people. Or are you like, hey, we love the freedom. So I don't have an answer for you. I don't really want to poison the well by talking about, like anecdotes, but it was interesting because I just talked to a student of mine. He's like, yeah, I was in an Uber. I had a discussion with an Uber driver and he's voting against this one because he's just like, yeah, it doesn't go far enough, basically. And that is the question. Does it go far enough? Is this the right decision? And again, you convince me that this is the right one. We can come back with other kinds of propositions, and there probably will be more in the future, which will address this. And so is this the right balance for a gig economy? What do we want to do as a society here? Okay, are there questions about this one? Anything? Not see anything posted about this one yet? Anything? Not so much. I know this is super fatiguing. Thank you for hanging out. It's hard. This is I'm going to lose my voice tonight. Okay. Proposition 23. Health Workers Union seeks stricter regulations for dialysis. Luckily, this is kind of an easy one. Proposition 23 targets kidney dialysis clinics. It would impose new regulations, which, by the way, kidney dialysis clinics are already regulated, but it would impose new regulations. It would require a physician to be on site at all times at these clinics. It would require reporting of infection data, because sometimes infections happen. Clinics or CDC chronic dialysis clinics would not allow them to close or reduce services without state approval. Clinics would not be able to refuse to treat patients based on the source of payment for care. And so this would apply to about 600 clinics that treat about 80,000 Californians every month. Yes, a lot of people have kidney problems. It generates about $3 billion in revenues annually for those companies from Medicare, Medi-Cal, and health insurance plans. And it basically, those benefits accrue to two companies, DaVita and Fresenius, that own 75% of all of those CDCs. Now, before you're all like go running off and be like, hey, people shouldn't be able to make that much money. Well, let's ask, what would this do? By the way, yes, you just did see, if you were voting in the election last time, 2 years ago, there was another one on the ballot, very similar to this, but actually went way further. And it would have really regulated the heck out of these kidney dialysis clinics. And these two companies, DaVita and Fresenius, poured money into its defeat. It was defeated. Who was it sponsored by? It was actually sponsored by the state United Healthcare Workers, SEIU, a labor union company. And the labor union company has sworn to bring it back. And this is what they brought back to the ballot. They're like, we're not going down without a fight. We're going to bring this back to the ballot. We're putting it on the ballot again. Well, they did. They scaled it back quite a lot. And this is what they came up with. So on the pro side, dialysis clinics would need to be, you're going to say, well, we need to incentivize them to clean up their act. Like, we need to give them more regulations. And this is going to also protect people in rural areas from clinic closures, because you'd have to get the approval of the state before you closed a clinic because it wasn't making enough money, for example. And on the con side, if you're against this, you'd say, well, it's kind of unnecessary and very costly to require a doctor or a nurse practitioner on site. So when they say a physician must be on site at all times, you're saying you have to have a doctor there or a nurse practitioner. And so, well, where are we going to get all those nurses and doctors from? Where were they going to come from? It would drain hospitals of needed staff. Like, okay, where are we going to magically come up with a bunch of doctors and nurses, physicians who want to hang around the kidney dialysis clinic? Good question. So if you're you're like the United Healthcare Workers West, a labor union, they put it on the ballot. If you're against, the California Medical Association is like totally opposed. American Nurses Association is opposed. The California Nurses Association is neutral on this one. So they did not say, they're not opposing it, but they're not endorsing it, which I think is kind of telling. So really, labor unions for it, all the medical workers and medical people are either not for it or are against it. 2 more to go. We're almost there. Oh my God. Okay. Proposition 24. What is this one? Mixed bag of new rules on consumer privacy with lots of loopholes. This is about the Consumer Privacy Act that California passed just last year. So the purpose of Proposition 24 would be to add more restrictions to the California Privacy Rights and Enforcement Act of 2018. It was signed into law 2018 before Jerry Brown left office and went into effect in 2019. Alastair McTaggart was one of the very 2 big billionaires who put this on the ballot, or was going to put it on the ballot. And it's a continuation of the previous effort, which I could take a minute to talk about. Alastair McTaggart, I think he made his money in real estate. It doesn't matter how he made his money really, but he was talking at a dinner party with somebody about how he was really concerned about how our data is being mined by companies. And it is, like, everything about us can be collected by companies online. And so the California Privacy Rights and Enforcement Act was born out of this conversation. He collected enough signatures to create a ballot initiative, to put it on the ballot and have voters vote on it. But instead of doing that, he brought it to the legislature, and he brought it to the state legislature, and the state legislature said, oh, well, we'd rather make a law out of it than turn it into a ballot proposition, because once it becomes a ballot proposition, it's really hard to change. The legislature can't change it. The only way to change a ballot measure or an initiative that has become law is with another ballot initiative, which is why you see a bunch of these things on the ballot this year, because they're changing prior ballot initiatives like Prop 13. The only way to change it is with another ballot measure. So yes. Yeah, go ahead, Riley.
So by change it, does that mean you can't roll back anything of the proposition without another proposition? Or does that mean you can't do anything in this area at all?
You can't change anything that the measure does specifically, you can't change. So you could do things that are related to it that were not addressed by the ballot initiative. But if it is addressed by the ballot initiative, the only way to change it would be with another ballot initiative. So for example, like the property tax rates, like would we have changed some of those measures about who can benefit from a property tax break? That has to be done by proposition, because it actually does speak directly to the law that Prop 13 created. But it's a great question. I think not a discussion for now, but really clearly how much you can get around or try to work around a ballot is always a question. This one, I think, does actually build in a safeguard, which is, I think, if you get 70%, I think it's this one. There's 1 or 2 of them that actually have a kind of a safety valve, which means, like, if 70% of the legislature agrees to change it, then you can change it. That's a super majority, right? So you have to really be tapped into, like, you have to have an amazingly high super majority to get anything changed by a legislative mandate. This one would, of course, continue the previous effort, and it would make more amendments difficult. In other words, a lot of so okay, so what happened, back to that story, the legislature pushed it through in record time. There was this deadline for McTaggart to pull the initiative before it went to the ballot, and literally minutes before the deadline, Jerry Brown signed it into law. They worked like lightning to make it happen. So it went into effect by law. But what has happened since then? All of every possible business that has any weight and lobbyists to hire have been going to the legislators and legislators, the individuals, and they've been saying things like, well, hey, we're an insurance company. We should be exempt from this law. We're this kind of a company. We should be exempt from this law. We're this kind of company. Exempt us from this law. And so they're like trying to chip away at our privacy rights, our privacy protections that were put into law. This is, by the way, modeled after a European law that's called the GDPR in Europe, which is the first of its kind. Ours is the only law of its kind in the United States. But it really does affect companies in every which way. So every time you go onto the internet and you see that little pop-up and it says, like, we accept, will you accept our cookies? And will you say, yes, we're gonna try to get this information about you. Do you say yes? That is all because of this law. Okay, but so what would Prop 24 do? It would make it really hard to water down the law, because it would say, this is the floor and it has to apply to everybody. You can't chip away at it, all right? So it does have more protections for consumers. It would protect you from people finding out your geolocation. Like if you don't want somebody to know where you are, then you could say, no, I don't want you to know, right? Like based on where I live or where I happen to be standing right now. Okay. So it does limit corporate control over the location, health information, race, religion, information that you may have in your possession you don't want to give up. It would also triple the fines to like $7,500 for buying or selling children's information. So if you're under the age of 18, and it would establish an agency to enforce the law. Now, it can be enforced through the Department of Justice, but we really don't have enough like law enforcement agents or attorneys or investigators to really figure out when and where these kinds of violations are happening. And so take it out of the Attorney General's office and put it in a new enforcement agency. Okay, some of the pros and cons. It would address, so if you're for it, it would address the loss of privacy, what they're also calling surveillance capitalism, which is that every time you go on the internet and you agree to for people to collect or companies to collect cookies on you, they can take that information and sell it. So they're selling your private information for a profit. So it addresses that, and it addresses the capture of personal information by companies. Now, they're saying, well, this already advantages an oligarchy, right? Like if certain companies can collect information about you, and nothing is private, well, that really advantages a few companies at your expense. And there's no democracy without privacy. If companies can find out anything they want to know about you and sell it, what kind of a democracy do we have? So that is part of what we're trying to address here. And then also the fact that 99% of our data of data generally is digitally stored, and it's proprietary, it's company controlled or owned. So how much more do we want them to know about us? Oh, it looks like I didn't quite finish that, but it was supposed to say that the original author, McTaggart, he's been accused of saying, well, even he doesn't get behind the regulations that are being proposed. He's like, that's preposterous. It does not weaken the law. I wrote this, as a follow-up, so it's not going to weaken anything. Now, if you are interested, you can also, I got some of those comments from an actual webcast in which he said that. Okay, Prop 14, if you're against this one, it should not say 14. It should say, I just realized that was a mistake. Hold on. I'm going to fix that because it's Prop 24, not 14. Okay, Prop 24. Let's do that. Let's fix that so that we are not confused. Okay, and I'll just say fixes, it weakens the law. It didn't weaken the law. Okay. So those who are against Prop 24 would say, well, let's give the 2018 law a try, give it a chance. We haven't even had a year where it's been in effect. So let's really give it a whirl first, okay? There is some, now I really could not get to the bottom of this before this presentation. Some people say, well, once you're out of state, there are no protections and they're going to get all your information anyway. So if you take your phone or you take your computer or your iPad or whatever, as soon as you exit the state, all bets are off and they're just going to collect it all. And so, this one word change to the law, they say it ends the prohibition that stops businesses from collecting personal information when the consumer and stored personal information is outside of California. I don't know. I would encourage you to figure that one out. I just didn't have time to research it before I came tonight. I wanted to, I just couldn't get there. So I don't know if that's true. But the original author is not pointing it out as a problem. If I can find more, I will try to, add something to your, send that out to you and I'll see what I can find. But if you're against it, you'd also say, well, it complicates the business environment and it makes California less competitive because now you have to go through and you have to, trade your privacy for access. Or it does actually, make people less competitive because they're always having to ask for information about you. And a lot of people say, no, I don't want you to collect that. So it does force people then also to trade their privacy for access or pay for access. So in other words, like if you really want to get onto a site and it says, you must accept cookies to get onto this site, and you say no, well, they're like, sorry, you can't get into our site. Okay. So what do you do then? Like, but I really want the information. Sorry, you have to give your privacy to do that. Okay, well, so are you trading your privacy for like, how do we address this really? Is this bill really, or is this initiative really doing anything about privacy? I'm going to give you two lists of pros and, like endorsers. The opponents say, well, opposition is growing daily with the ACLU of California, League of Women Voters, Consumer Federation of America, or California, Council of Churches, Alliance for Retired People, Color of Change, Public Citizen, all these, they all say no. On the other hand, Andrew Yang and a whole lot of other people say yes. Consumer Watchdog, NAACP, Digital Citizen, California firefighters. I don't know why the firefighters. A lot of labor unions. They say our data is ours, should be ours, no matter what platforms or apps we use. That's why I hope California voters will join me in supporting Prop 24 by voting yes in November. And then Alistair McTaggart also said, this is about power. Corporations are more powerful than any corporation has ever been. And now they know more than everything about you and have more power than any other human being. So we should try our best to limit that. Okay. And these are some of the other ones. All right. And on and on. Okay. Last one. We made it. Okay. Here we go. Proposition 25. If you want to end money bail for defendants, vote yes on this one. This bears repeating. This bears repeating because it's a really confusing initiative. It's not clear whether you need to vote yes or no. I'm telling you right here. If you want to end money bail for defendants, vote yes on this one. Okay. Money bail. Remember the old sign, you drive down the freeway and there'd be this great, very big neon colored sign. And it's like the bail king, the bail prince or whatever, like all these bail bondsmen who would put up bail to get people out of jail. Okay. They're gone because the state of California ended money bail, or they're about to. Okay. First of all, though, watch for disinformation. A computer algorithm is not going to make the decision about who gets to get money bail or not, or who gets to, be stuck in jail and who gets to be released. A judge still makes that decision, okay? But there's a lot of disinformation out there, and it even came up in my California politics class, where it wasn't really clear. It's like, yes, a computer is going to be spitting out a piece of paper that says these are the risk factors and this is what we believe the risk of flight is based on these factors. But a judge doesn't say, well, I'm just going to look at that number and gee, you can't get out of jail because a computer said that. Judges are smart people. they actually take a lot of factors into consideration. And so they're going to use that among many factors, or they're going to use that to helpfully base their decisions, on which to base their decisions. Okay. So while the pre-trial risk assessment model that weighs whether a person is at risk to reoffend or fail to appear before the court does use computer algorithms, judicial officers remain the final authority in making pretrial release or detention decisions, according to the judicial branch of California. That means that while judges may rely on these algorithm-assisted risk assessment models and recommendations, they have the power to override those recommendations, and they just take them into consideration. Okay, so this is really about two things. Should we get rid of cash bail, and how does that affect businesses? If you want that to be a business in California, then you are going to vote no on this. Sorry, I'm trying to switch it so that I can see it. Hang on. Trying to get back. Sorry, I can't quite see it. It is really about freedom. Should you allow people to give judges the freedom to base their decisions on their risk assessment, or should people gain their freedom between the time they're arrested and the time they go to trial? Should they be in jail based on their assessment of risk or their ability to pay bail? Assessment of risk versus their ability to pay. So in California, if you are in a situation where you are arrested, you're brought before a judge, the judge will say, I believe these are risk factors. I'm setting bail at $50,000. Go sit in jail until you can post bail. How does it work? Well, cash bail, if you want to vote yes on this. I'm trying to figure out if I want to talk about cash bail or just go right into the yes and no. I'll try to do it all together. Cash bail has been a pretty shady business, okay? And if you vote yes for it, it means that people are going, cash bail already means that, okay, so if you got $50,000 bail that bail is put up so that if you pay $50,000, you get your $50,000 back if you show up for trial, right? We believe that, or $100,000 or $1.5 million. And if you can't pay it, you have to sit in jail till your trial. And your trial is not going to be in 3 weeks. It's going to be months, or it could be a year, right? It could be even longer. So if you cannot post bail, you are sitting in jail. Okay, that's number one. If you can post bail, that means that generally you are paying at least 10% to a bail bonds person. You're paying it to a company that's non-refundable. So if you're slapped with $50,000 bail and you want to get out on bail, then that $5,000 is gone. So you're paying $5,000 to get out of jail. You're paying $5,000 to get out of jail. So this is already hurting people, possibly, because they're low income. And it hurts families because now if somebody's accused of a crime and they're going to be coming up for a trial, they're going to be in jail, sitting there in jail because they can't afford bail. And it doesn't matter what their risk assessment factors are. So this does favor the wealthy who can pay. Look, if you come from a really rich family and mom and dad can pay $1.5 million, they can say, yes, I'm going to put up my house. I'm going to post bail and that's my collateral. No problem. Then, Junior gets out of jail free. Not free. I mean, it's, you get your 1.5 back, but the $150,000 you had to pay to the bail bondsman, well, maybe we can afford that, right? So it does really disproportionately affect poor people. And those who are falsely accused. If you've been falsely accused, you get to your trial, you're eventually found innocent, you're still sitting in jail because you couldn't post bail. But obviously, this does, these flight risk factors have to be taken into effect. So it does have negative effects on families. Now, if you want to vote no on this, you want cash bail to stay around, you're saying, well, this could lead to the release of dangerous people who just simply, they were let out and they have no reason to come back because they have, they don't have any cash in the system. They don't have any money riding on that system. And so they're saying this puts all the power in a judge's hands And of course, it already was in judges' hands because judges set the bail, but whatever. But they say it's all in the hands of computer algorithms, which are based on traits like age, which is also related to race and ethnicity. Judges could deny release, leading to unfair outcomes for people of color, and it doesn't solve our problems. Okay. Well, because of this doesn't solve our problems, and it could have negative outcomes for people of color, there are people on both sides of this issue. The California ACLU is actually recommending a no vote, but then there are other pro-immigrant and I should say nonprofits that are say vote yes. I mean, there's really this weird split over this very contentious kind of initiative. Senator Hertzberg, who authored the measure, said the bail industry and the insurance companies behind them that made $560 million in 2018, by the way, well, they're angry because we're putting them out of business, Hertzberg said. Well, you know what? The slave traders, I'm sure, were angry when we had the Emancipation Proclamation. Ouch. Oh boy, that hurts. Okay, so bail bondsmen know it is going to ruin the industry in California. People are out of business. They don't want to lose that business. Okay. On the other hand, Prop 25, and you can go to the no on Prop 25s. There's lots of other arguments on the other hand. They say bail helps provide justice to crime victims by ensuring people accused of a crime show up for their court appearances. In other words, you got skin in the game, right? That you've heard that phrase before. It's not a great phrase, but I assume it means like, I'm thinking it means like refers to a football, right? With leather football, skin in the game. Well, okay, well, yeah, but holding defendants accountable for their actions, does it require money for you to be held accountable? Leading victim advocates like Crime Victims United, Crime Survivors, and Class Kids Foundation oppose it because it takes away accountability and incentive to show up for your trial. So that's the question. What do you need to hold people accountable? Okay, so for SEIU, California Democratic Party, California Medical Association, Gavin Newsom, the Assembly Speaker. Against, California State Conference of the NAACP, the Peace Officers Association, bail agents, Human Rights Watch, and of course, all the bail companies are against it. Oh, I'm sorry. The ACLU, I misspoke. I said the California ACLU. It was the NAACP. ACLU is actually neutral on this one. ACLU is neutral. The American Civil Liberties Union is neutral. So, okay, there you have it, both sides. A couple other things. This should also not say Prop 14. It should say Prop 25. You can tell which one I use as a template. So this is a little bit out of order because that should have come earlier. I will say this, 2/3 of the accused cannot make bail as it currently is. And it costs us up to $5 million a day as taxpayers to keep people in jail who cannot afford bail. So should you let them out? This is pretty bold. We're the first state to try it. The law was signed into 2018 to do away with cash bail. This is basically a referendum to get rid of it because the bail bonds people were like, hell no, you're not taking away our livelihoods without a fight. Lobbyists, though, for the industry are very strong in all the states. And so we managed to get this passed in California. But of course, the bail companies are like up in arms. It will not solve the problem of unfair outcomes. That is always going to be an issue. Federal courts, however, already work this way. Federal courts work this way. So we would be taking the federal court model and adapting it to California. So we could try it. And also the law would prevent fees from being charged to the accused. So it's not like we would say, oh yeah, no cash bail, but we're also going to tack some fees onto you to make you pay somehow. That actually is prevented. So that is actually the end. There are a lot of pros and cons on both sides. And as you can see, for every single one of these issues,